Kia ora everyone and good evening. Thought I would just jump quickly online to follow up on the update that you will have heard from our COVID response minister, Minister Chris Hipkins today, just to see if there are any extra questions, but also just to reassure everyone that we'll keep putting out lots of information on what we know and, of course, what we are continuing to learn, particularly through testing, which gives us lots of good information these days about the origin of cases. So, for anyone who didn't hear the update today, we do have a COVID case of someone who has recently returned from overseas, been through their managed isolation, tested negative while they were in their managed isolation, but after being released from that, have subsequently had some symptoms, had a test and tested positive. So of course we can trace that case back to the border. What we need to determine is whether or not it's a case of the individual in question having had a very late onset of COVID, having picked it up from overseas, so that we know that that can happen sometimes. It's not nearly as common as the majority of cases, which will come through within 14 days, which is why we use 14 days as our guide. It is not common, but it is possible. So we're working through to see whether that is what has happened here, or whether or not this person, while they've been in managed isolation, have picked up COVID from within the facility. Now, the way that we can answer the question of how it is that they've come to have COVID, whether or not it was a later onset or whether or not it was from within the facility, is through genome sequencing. Now, many of you will be familiar with what that is. It is essentially when we conduct a test on someone now, when we have everyone in our facilities, if anyone tests positive for COVID, we immediately undertake what they call genome sequencing. So that helps us then to essentially put a code against that person's COVID, and it gives us a clue as to where they've picked it up from, which country they might have picked it up from, because we see certain sequences coming from certain parts of the world. So that means that we've got almost, for want of a better word, a unique identifier. So that means if anyone else then comes to have COVID, we can match it to see where it came from. So we'll know whether or not it's come from the facility or whether or not actually this person happens to have had it from overseas, but it just hasn't infected them or shown up for some time after the 14 days. So we'll know that in the next, we should know that within the next 24 hours, and that's information that we'll be sharing. And so what does it mean for everyone in the meantime? Well, this really, again, is that ongoing reminder that we need to make sure that we are scanning everywhere we go. Now, one of the things that I've heard from people is that some people think that if they have their Bluetooth on and their COVID app, that they don't need to scan. Unfortunately, that's not the case. We need you to scan everywhere that you go. The Bluetooth element just tells us if you've been in close contact with someone else who might in the future test positive, and that enables us to identify people who've been in close proximity. It doesn't tell us where you've been. So that's why we need you to keep scanning no matter what. So please scan everywhere you go. Fantastic thing here is we have someone who has. So we are now reaching out to all of those venues that we need to, and all of the people who have scanned into those venues to give them notice that they need, if they are a close contact, we can tell them that they need to be in isolation and that they need to be tested. We then publicly put out that information as well. So if anyone's been in any of those areas, stay tuned for that follow-up information. We will also keep you up to date on whether or not any of the close contacts we're testing come back positive or negative. And that's usually a bit of an indication as to whether or not the person is likely to be infected. infectious, particularly infectious. So we'll get an early sign of that, and we'll be letting you know that information tomorrow as well. So the other just little request that I would have is I just see a bit of a sense from people online, and just generally, and this happens almost every time we have a COVID case, sometimes there's a tendency to blame. And the message I really want to share here is the most important thing for us is that people, when they're unwell, continue to get tested. And people are less likely to do that if they feel like they'll be attacked if they happen to be positive. And so we really need people not to pile in on anyone if they do the right thing by having a COVID test. It is so important. We need people to keep feeling like they can come forward. So it's so important that we just keep that kindness, that we just treat people the way we would like to be treated if we were in that circumstance. Imagine if your family member tested positive, and just imagine how you would want them to be treated. And that's really such an important message to share. The second thing is whenever we have a case that's linked to the border, as this one is, so we know what the likely scenario that's occurred here, and we narrow that down, and that gives us a lot of answers, and then it gives us a chance to then say, well, what do we need to do differently to stop this happening again? But anytime we have a situation like this, people often will say, just shut the borders entirely, don't let anyone in. We can't do that. As a New Zealand citizen, you have the right to come back to New Zealand. And if we denied you the right to come back to New Zealand, we would be making you stateless. We would be saying that the one legal place that you can live, you can't come back to, which could make you stateless. So you'll notice that virtually no country I know of in the world is closing its borders to its citizens. We are amongst the few, very few, who have said that we won't let in other people. We're just limiting it to our permanent residents and citizens. But that is the reason we can't close off our borders to our citizens. So I know that people want to just keep everyone safe, but that's the reason we have to allow people to come back. What we are doing, though, is limiting how many come at a time. And that's because it allows us... that just allows us to make sure that as people are coming through, that we have the ability to manage the number coming through as well as we possibly can with a small number that we're dealing with at any given time with COVID, and just to reduce down risk. The other thing to think about, that if we were to close our borders entirely, that means we wouldn't get in our imports, we wouldn't be getting goods coming into the country, we wouldn't be getting medical supplies, because all of those are coming in at our borders. But we have these regimes in place to even make sure that we look after each other and keep each other safe while things are still coming in at the borders and so on. So the thing again I would just say is, think back. We have had scenarios before where we've had people who have come through our managed isolation facilities who have subsequently then tested positive. And we worked, in those cases, we worked very hard to ensure that there was no further spread. We've had, unfortunately, people who've worked in our MIQ. It is a virus we work very hard to contain, but from time to time we may have these scenarios. What's really important is that we always are very, very rigorous in keeping it totally contained, and you'll see us working very hard on that as we speak, and we are. And the other thing is that we always go back and look to see whether or not there are things that we need to learn about what happened. We already do regular audits of our infection control in our managed isolation facilities, and every time we have a case like this, we will rigorously go back and say, what exactly happened here? Do we need to change the way that we're managing those cases in MIQ? What can we learn? And so we work very hard never to repeat any mistakes and so on. And also to try and, again, continue to keep adding these filters that keep everyone safe. So there's no suggestion at this stage that we need to put in place. I just see someone there said, do we need to go into level 4? No, of course. Remember those times we've had to move up those alert levels. that's been where we haven't been able to identify what's happened. We know what's happened here. We're just narrowing down exactly how it happened, whether or not it was within facility or a later onset. So we should be able to answer those questions, I would hope, over the next 24 to 48 hours, and we'll be sharing what we learn. So I'll touch base again soon, just again to answer questions and I can see here the feedback people where most of their concerns might be, and just try and touch on some of those things as well. But needless to say, everyone, I've been in really close contact today throughout the day between our officials and Minister Hipkins, making sure we're never leaving no stone unturned, as we always do, to make sure we keep everyone safe. Look after yourselves out there. Remember, be kind to one another. Please be kind to our border staff, and please be understanding of those who have the experience of having COVID. They do us a service every time they come forward and get tested, as you do as well. So please always remember that we need to look after those who just do the right thing. Till then, I'll jump online again very soon. Look after yourselves, and I'll catch up with you in the next 24 to 48 hours. So keep an eye out if you want another update. Please do join me for that. Till then, I'm going to get back to some cabinet papers. I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday. To everyone who's about to experience Wellington Anniversary Day, enjoy that too. And please take very good care. Talk soon.